The Detroit Lions have constructed one of the best offensive units across the NFL, and over the last several seasons, they have proved that time and time again. Going back to even the 2022 season, the Lions have had a consensus top five offense by the numbers, and yet when talking about the best offenses in the NFL, and when talking about the best offenses even within the NFC conference, the Detroit Lions are very rarely ever mentioned, right? It's always the San Francisco 49ers. It's always the Philadelphia Eagles. It's always the Dallas Cowboys. And at best, the Detroit Lions seem to come in at fourth within their own conference of the NFC. However, over the last couple of years, the numbers would tell you otherwise. And going into 2024, I would make the argument that the Detroit Lions have the best offensive construction and the best overall offensive unit in not just the NFC, but in the entirety of the NFL. So today we're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at what the Detroit Lions have done over the last several seasons, why they've been so successful, what has led to their uprising to have an elite NFL offense, and then talk about whether or not the 2024 offense can match the production of previous years, as well as continue to improve into the best offense in the NFL. So starting off in 2022, when Ben Johnson took over as the offensive coordinator, the Detroit Lions had a very strong offensive showing, ranking as the fifth overall offense, the sixth overall passing attack, the 11th overall rushing attack, and ranking in the top five in scoring offenses in 2022. In fact, throughout the first month of the NFL season, the Detroit Lions were on pace to be the highest scoring offense of all time, averaging 31 points per game. However, going 1-3 in that period, largely due to some turnover concerns as well as the defense. Now, those numbers in 2022 are very promising numbers, and they were great numbers for a team that in 2021, I would say really struggled on the offensive side of the ball, right? But the new offensive coordinator and some of the new weapons really helped boost the Detroit Lions into the top tiers of the NFL. But even looking at their 2022 weaponry, it really wasn't all that special. Amon-Ra St. Brown was a great wide receiver, put up 1,100 yards that year, but was only going into his second year of NFL play, while Khalif Raymond was the team's second leading wide receiver, DJ Chark was the team's third leading wide receiver, Josh Reynolds was the team's fourth wide receiver, and TJ Hawkinson, despite just playing 7 games for the Lions that year, ranked as the fifth best and fifth leading receiver on that team. Again, despite being traded at the midseason mark and playing less than half of the team's games. The team's rushing attack was anchored by Jamal Williams, who had 1,000 yards for the first time in his NFL career, as well as DeAndre Swift, who was a good and impactful receiving back, but left a lot to be desired on the ground, as well as missing quite a few games with injuries as well as load management. So in 2023, the Detroit Lions made quite a few changes to their offense, and it showed on the field. The Detroit Lions had the fifth overall offense for the second year in a row, but improved their passing attack to second in the NFL, their rushing attack to fifth in the NFL, and their scoring offense remained as a top 5 unit across the league. And I would argue that the Lions' offensive weaponry in 2023 was significantly better, with Amon-Ra St. Brown having a 1,500-yard career season, Sam Laporta coming in and giving the tight end group an instant boost, with Josh Reynolds taking a massive step forward in the Ben Johnson offense, Khalif Raymond still being just as productive as 2022, Jameson Williams finally starting to get involved in the offense, with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs being significant upgrades from Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift, respectively. Now, on top of all of that, going into 2024, the Detroit Lions, I would say for the second year in a row, have the top offensive line in all of football. And you could argue last year was the Philadelphia Eagles, but certainly this season with the retirement of Jason Kelce and the Lions' addition of Kevin Zeitler, they have the best offensive line going into 2024. Taylor Decker, I would say, is probably a top 10 to 15 left tackle in the NFL. Graham Glasgow was well above average at the left guard position. Frank Ragnow is top 2 at his position. Kevin Zeitler has been one of the best offensive guards of the last decade, and Penei Sewell, I would say, is probably the best offensive lineman in all of football right now. On top of that, going into 2024, the Detroit Lions have a quarterback that is not only a top 5 quarterback statistically in the NFL over the last half a decade, but a quarterback that is coming off of the best season of his career, throwing for 4,500 yards, 30 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. Jared Goff had the highest completion percentage of his career in 2024, had the third highest passing yards, and was tied for the second most passing touchdowns in his entire career, and certainly the best career year he's had in Detroit. Now, on top of that, you pair that with a wide receiver in Amon-Ra St. Brown, who last year was an all-pro at the position, who had 120 receptions for 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns through the year. A rookie standout all-pro who had 86 receptions for 890 yards and 10 touchdowns, having arguably the best rookie tight end season of NFL history. And then you get into some of the depth pieces, right? You have Jameson Williams, who a season ago had 24 receptions for 354 yards and 2 touchdowns, while also contributing on the ground for 3 carries, 29 yards, and a touchdown there. But on top of that, in the playoffs, Jameson Williams had 6 receptions for 79 yards and a touchdown, as well as a carry on the ground for 42 yards and a touchdown. So you're talking about a player who through 17 games a season ago had well over 500 yards receiving, had just about 50 yards on the ground, and put together about 4 total touchdowns for the team, a lot of which came against playoff caliber defenses in really, really strong secondaries. Now, Jameson Williams now goes into an offseason with no distractions, no injuries up to this point, no suspension, and really no reason for him not to be successful and take that massive leap forward. And with the subtraction of Josh Reynolds from this offense, there's about 70 more targets to go Jameson Williams' way. And with how explosive he was a season ago and how consistent he became at the end of the season, there's a good chance that Jameson Williams is pushing 800 to 1,000 yards in 2024, even if he doesn't improve that much statistically from an efficiency standpoint. If you double his targets, that puts Jameson Williams right about at 800 yards, and that's assuming that his drops continue. That's assuming that Jameson Williams doesn't get any more consistent and simply just gets about half as many targets as Josh Reynolds is leaving behind. So I would say pretty conservatively, we can count on Jameson Williams, if healthy, for a solid 500, 600, 700 yards at a bare minimum. And he's a player that is going to be super explosive and stretch the field. Khalif Raymond, since joining the Detroit Lions, has averaged 500 yards a season and 3 touchdowns, while also being a great kick and punt return option. Donovan Peoples-Jones in 2022 put up over 800 yards and 3 touchdowns as the Cleveland Browns wide receiver too. And that's not even putting together the contributions of the running backs, who had 316 yards and 100 yards respectively between the two of them, and each combined for a touchdown through the air. Now, on top of the passing attack, the Detroit Lions rushing offense a season ago was really, really good, with Jahmyr Gibbs having 945 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns on the ground, with David Montgomery leading the pair with 1,015 rushing yards and 13 touchdowns on the ground. So last year, they had very clearly an elite offense, and I would say that this season, despite not adding very much to the weaponry, there's a good chance that Jameson Williams improves significantly. There's a good chance that both Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta take a step forward in their second year, and I would say there's a pretty good chance that the offensive line, with the addition of Kevin Zeitler, becomes a lot more consistent and becomes a much better offensive line over the entirety of the season without the rotating door at left guard. So I put together a little bit of a projection for 2024, and I wanted to keep this pretty realistic and even a little bit on the conservative side, just to make sure and show you how explosive and how good this offense can be. So with conservative estimates going into 2024, I would say that the Lions are pretty good for Amon-Ra St. Brown to have about 1,300 yards and 8 touchdowns. That is a lot of yards and a lot of production. But again, that is assuming that Amon-Ra St. Brown takes a step back from 2023 and has over 200 less receiving yards and gets into the end zone 2 times less. I would say that Sam Laporta is good for 800 yards and 10 touchdowns. Again, assuming that he regresses from 2023 by about 50 yards and has the same amount of touchdowns, not taking that step forward at all. Jameson Williams, I would say, is good for 700 yards and 4 touchdowns. Once again, assuming that Jameson Williams doesn't improve and doesn't get better and just gets a little bit more of the target share, that's exactly where Jameson Williams would have been if you just simply doubled his target share from a season ago, which is about half the targets left behind by Josh Reynolds. Khalif Raymond, again, assuming his career average with the Detroit Lions goes down by 100 yards, he's still good for 400 yards and a touchdown. Donovan Peoples-Jones, assuming he gets to just over half of what what he was in 2022 is still good for 500 yards and 3 touchdowns. And then assuming that, again, the running back duo do not take a step forward and contribute exactly the same as a season ago, they're good for 300 and 100 yards respectively with a touchdown apiece. That puts the Detroit Lions at a conservative passing estimate of 4,100 passing yards and 28 touchdowns. And while I think the passing attack will be great, I think the rushing attack will be just as good. Right? Last year, David Montgomery had 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, had 13 touchdowns, in fact. Jahmyr Gibbs had just under 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns. And I would say Vaki, the fourth-round selection from Utah, probably contributes up to 200 yards of this offense as well and a singular touchdown on the year. So that means that even if the running backs repeat what they did a season ago and really don't improve very much at all, they're still putting up a rushing attack of over 2,200 yards and 21 touchdowns. That puts the Detroit Lions at 6,300 offensive yards, a conservative estimate. That would put them as the fifth best offense a season ago, assuming that just about every single player either doesn't develop the way that the Lions want them to or actively regresses in the 2024 season. So with that being said, I would absolutely make the argument that the Detroit Lions have the best offensive unit in all of football. Do they have the best running back room in the NFL, or do they have the best wide receiver room in the NFL? Probably not. But the wide receiver room is getting better, right? Their offensive line got better and was already a top 2 unit in the NFL. They have a top 2 running back duo in the NFL. They have a top 3 quarterback in the NFC conference. They have the best offensive coordinator in the NFC conference. So while you might not look at the Detroit Lions wide receivers and say, yeah, that is a super impressive group. And yeah, the wide receivers might not rival Philadelphia or San Francisco or really maybe even Dallas, depending on how you feel about CeeDee Lamb and the rest of that class. The Detroit Lions wide receiving core got better in 2024 offseason after being the second best passing attack in 2023. Their offensive line got better despite being the number 2 offensive line in all of football last year. Their running back duo is easily top 2 in the NFL, and I would argue was even the best running back duo in the NFL. Their quarterback in Jared Goff has been one of the top 5 statistical quarterbacks in the past half a decade, and their offensive coordinator in Ben Johnson is widely regarded as the best offensive play caller in the NFL. And if he's not number 1, he's certainly number 2. So with all of those factors combined, I find it baffling that people don't consider the Detroit Lions an elite offense, that they don't consider the Detroit Lions even on the same tier as the 49ers or the Cowboys or the Philadelphia Eagles going into 2024, despite actively producing more than those teams over the last 2 seasons and getting better in the 2024 offseason. So with all of that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. That is my pitch for the Detroit Lions and my case for why they are the best offense in the NFL. Of course, leave your comments down below. Do you believe they're the best offense in the NFL? Do you believe there's a team better than them? Is there a team better than them in the NFC? Go toe-to-toe with any offense and see how they stack up. I'd be very curious what you guys have to say and what you guys think. But with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.